I'm going to look at the steady state responses of the body to exercise. Steady state exercise is exercising at the same intensity throughout an exercise, as well as a balance between the energy needed by the working muscles and the rate of oxygen. When you exercise at a steady state, your heart rate stays the same roughly throughout the whole time, so therefore athletes only really use steady state exercise when jogging or cycling and on an exercise bike. I'm going to also be looking at the cardiovascular responses to steady state exercise. Firstly, heart rate. Before you take part in steady state exercise, your heart rate will automatically rise due to the anticipatory rise. It will then be controlled by your sinoatrial SAN. Your heart rate will then either go up or down depending on the information it receives from the sympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system speeds up the heart rate by the synapse secreting a hormone called noradrenaline, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system slows the heart rate down because the synapse secretes a hormone called acetylcholine. Stroke volume is the amount of blood being pumped out of the left ventricle each beat. Stroke volume increases corresponding to how you exercise, and because I'm looking at steady state exercise, this occurs at the same intensity throughout, so your body needs oxygen but only a certain amount, which won't change much throughout the activity. The stroke volume for a man is approximately 70 milliliters. However, for Mo Farah, an Olympic athlete, it is 110 and rises to 200 milliliters during exercise. This is because he has an increased amount of venous return, which is where the deoxygenated blood returns to the heart by forcing blood through the one-way valves that lead to the heart. Cardio output is the amount of blood pumped by your heart per minute. During steady state exercise, your cardio output rises due to the need of increased blood flow to your working muscles, meaning that your heart has to pump faster. Also, working muscles increase stroke volume by distributing higher amounts of blood volume back to the lungs for oxygen. Due to your heart rate and stroke volume rising, this will also increase your cardio output. The average cardio output for a male at rest is about 5,000 milliliters. However, Mo Farah's cardio output at rest is 3,600 milliliters. His cardio output is lower because his heart is more sufficient at supplying oxygen to the body, and this goes hand in hand with his low resting heart rate. The components that help support the venous return are the muscle pump, pocket valves, respiratory pump, smooth muscles, gravity. Pocket valves help as valves in the veins by preventing backflow of blood away from the heart and directing it to the heart. Mo Farah will have very healthy pocket valves so that the backflow doesn't occur. Mo Farah's veins undergo compression as the muscles surrounding them contract, and they become decompressed as the muscles relax. Therefore, with normal sequences of contraction and relaxation, the veins are alternately pumped. Muscle contraction pushes the blood forward through the valves and obstructs flow into the muscle. During muscle relaxation, the valves open and blood flows into and fills the venous segment, so that when Mo Farah muscles contract, this helps blood push back to the heart. Mo Farah's respiratory pump helps return blood in the thoracic cavity and abdomen back to the heart. While exercising, we breathe quicker and deeper, which quickly changes the pressure inside the thorax between high and low to help press the blood in the area back to the heart. The smooth muscle helps the venous return through each vein because it contracts to help push the blood back towards the heart. Finally, gravity aids the venous return by helping the veins in the upper body to return the blood back to the heart. Blood pressure is a measure of the force that your heart uses to pump blood around your body. It is highest in the arteries, as these are the first blood vessels it flows into from the heart. During steady state exercise, it can increase due to the cardio output increasing, as well as forcing more blood through the arteries. This can happen by vasoconstriction, where the blood vessels contract, rises in blood viscosity, and changes in shape or size of the vessels. Blood flow. When blood is circulated around the body, the working muscles need a greater amount of blood, so the blood flow adjusts to allow more energy and oxygen to reach muscle groups that need it more. This is also known as a vascular shunt. Vasodilation happens when oxygen levels decrease due to the increased muscle use. Substances such as lactic acid and carbon dioxide build up. Mo Farah uses this response so that his blood vessels dilate to allow easier access to oxygen. However, his blood pressure will decrease due to the blood vessels dilation. Thermoregulation is the process of keeping a constant body temperature. During steady-state exercise, plasma volume increases due to an increase of temperature due to the exercise, which turns into excess heat. The increased plasma helps to support sweat gland functions for the body during heat stress and does this by vessels passing close to the surface of the skin. Mo Farah relies on this process so that he's able to last long periods of time without getting too hot. Starling's law. During steady-state exercise, Starling's law suggests that there is an increase in venous return and the stroke volume can increase in response to blood filling the heart. The increase in blood stretches the cardiac muscle to a greater degree, as well as an increase in stroke volume due to the greater contractions of the cardiac muscle during exercise, therefore forcing the heart to pump out more blood each contraction. This relates to Mo Farah's steady-state training because during exercise his stroke volume increases in response to an increase in the volume of blood filling the heart. I'm now going to be moving on to the respiratory response to steady-state exercise. During steady-state exercise, the breathing rate and depth will remain constant once the body's demands are agreed, because the athlete will be exercising at a continuous speed, meaning the breathing rate will stay the same as shown on this graph here on the right. Tidal volume is the volume of air inspired or expired in a single breath during a steady-state exercise. Your body's production of carbon dioxide goes up, increasing tidal volume until your carbon dioxide is released and the amount of oxygen is parallel to the carbon dioxide during steady-state exercise. Mo Farah needs to be able to control his breathing rate early into exercise, therefore he increases his tidal volume, which is better for alveoli ventilation. Oxygen dissociation curve. This curve shows the connection between oxygen levels and hemoglobin saturation. Hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen increases as succeeding molecules of oxygen bind. As the oxygen partial pressure increases, more molecules bind up until the maximum amount that can bond is reached. Very little additional binding occurs after this curve levels out, as this hemoglobin becomes saturated with oxygen. If the hemoglobin is completely full with oxygen, it is saturated. If the oxygen is unloading from the hemoglobin, this is called dissociation. It is a valuable tool for understanding how oxygen is transported to the tissues of the body from the lungs. When Mo Farah is training at a steady state, his curve is moved to the right by an increase in temperature, and this causes a decrease in the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. This makes it harder for the hemoglobin to bind to oxygen because it requires a higher partial pressure, but it makes it easier for the hemoglobin to release bonds of oxygen. Now I'm going to be moving on to the neuromuscular response to steady-state exercise. Firstly, the muscle spindles. Muscle spindles are in the sensory end organ in a muscle and detect changes in length of the muscle and are located in the skeletal tissues. It is sensitive to stretch in the muscles. They help muscles to contract by being stimulated when the muscles start to move and change length. This detects proprioceptors to send a signal via the afferent nerve fibers to the central nervous system, where Mo Farah, who trains on the steady-state exercise almost daily, will become regular with the steady-state exercise, meaning that his body is more used to this type of exercise, which enhances his muscle spindles to become better at transmitting the same information. This leads to his muscles becoming more flexible over time. I'm now moving on to the Golgi tendon organ. The Golgi tendon is also located in the skeletal muscle with the muscle spindle, but is smaller than the muscle spindle and is a proprioceptive sensory receptor organ that detects changes in muscle tension. It belongs to the nervous system and function to influence movement. The Golgi tendon organ helps a muscle contract by sending information to the central nervous system about the strength of the muscle contraction. For example, when lifting heavy weights, your Golgi tendon organ will tell you how much tension muscle is exerting. If there's too much tension, the Golgi tendon organ will stop the muscle from creating any force and therefore protecting you from hurting yourself. So when a Golgi tendon organ is stimulated, it causes the associated muscle to relax by interpreting its contraction, so together they make it easier for movement patterns to take place. The energy continuum. The energy continuum describes the three energy systems in various activities, and most activities use a mixture of all three energy systems. The three systems are the ATP PC system, lactic acid system, and the aerobic endurance energy system, and how the energy systems interact to provide energy for resynthesis of ATP. The energy continuum provides energy for the ATP resynthesis during steady state exercise by regenerating the ATP throughout the energy systems. Each of the energy systems contribute ATP to an athlete during a performance. The aerobic energy system. The aerobic energy uses fats, carbohydrates, and proteins to resynthesize ATP for energy use. The systems produce way more ATP than any other of the energy systems, but at a slower rate. Therefore, it cannot fuel intense exercise that demands the fast production of ATP, like short distance races, and accesses a massive store of virtually unlimited energy. As of why it is used for athletes like Mo Farah. Mo Farah uses this aerobic system because it does not produce nearly as much power as the other system, but its size is practically limitless as it just keeps on producing ATPs. Therefore, when Mo Farah is exercising steady state, he is using his aerobic system. The aerobic system works via 3 stages. Each of these stages contributes by producing ATP. But this process in which they work is much more complicated than the other energy system, and that's why ATP production is much slower. The three stages of the aerobic energy system. The last energy system is the aerobic system, which has 3 stages. These stages are aerobic glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electronic transport chain. Firstly, the aerobic glycolysis stage starts off with high levels of ADP, which stimulates the GP to break the glycogen into glucose. The glucose is then broken down by PFK enzymes into pyruvic acid. As this process takes place, the mitochondria, also known as the powerhouse muscle cell, where the aerobic respiration and energy takes place. The reaction occurs in this stage known as the aerobic glycolysis. The second stage of the aerobic system is the Krebs cycle. This process starts off with the actyl coenzyme A being synthesized with oxalic acid from the citric acid. The citric acid creates the Krebs cycle by producing oxalic acid which can regenerate the cycle until it runs out. It also produces 2 phosphate molecules. The third and final stage is the electron transport chain. The hydrogen formed by the Krebs cycle binds with the NAD and the FAD to bind to form NADH and FADH carrier molecules, where they carry the hydrogen through a series of reactions down to the electron transport chain. Once the reaction has taken place, hydrogen ions H+ are made, and byproducts are H2O created to cool your body down during exercise. Hydrogen electrons are also made as a part of the reaction, which forms 34 phosphate molecules. The aerobic system is the energy system used for athletes like Mo Farah. Since distance runners is primarily limited by the delivery and use of oxygen, most of your training should focus on improving your aerobic system's ability to supply oxygen to your running muscles. It is not easy for our bodies to store ATP, so it is crucial for constantly creating ATP during exercise. For long distance runners like Mo Farah, the major energy conversion way is aerobic metabolism. Mo Farah's aerobic metabolism allows him to be such a successful long distance athlete because this is the pathway which provides energy for long distance running. His aerobic method converts carbohydrates, fats, and proteins to ATP using oxygen. Fats are used in long distance events over carbs and fats because damaged muscles are repaired by proteins, which are normally used as a fuel for muscle activity. Relying on the circulatory system to supply oxygen to the working muscles before ATP can be created, the pathway is slower than